We're going to get started this morning, and we're gonna be talking about this topic. I guess some of y'all saw my Facebook post, and it says we need to talk uh, social injustice and civil disobedience. Because everybody I talk to, everybody's got a different opinion of what's going on in our country right now. Uh, I have the fortunate foresight to have lived through the '60s, which this kind of feels like, and to have experienced all this before. I'm not saying I have any answers, because quite frankly, I listen to everybody's thoughts and I think, well, that sounds right. This sounds right. They sound right. And I just wanted to begin this morning because here's what I want to get. I want to get back to a place to where I'm confident in what God would have me do during a time such as this. I will begin this conversation, and then I'm going to let you guys do the talking. I'll begin this conversation by saying this: is that what happened to George Floyd was absolutely wrong, and it's a terrible shame that anyone has to die, um, and and that because of that, it sparks riots, it sparks protest, and that social injustice sparked civil disobedience, and so I want us to figure out, it's a fine line. I want us to talk about how to stay on God's side of the fine line, if that makes any sense. So the first question I want to ask you guys is just to be honest about how you're feeling today.
So the issue in of itself is just really complicated because it's just not just that one singular event. It's just a culmination of all the events that have happened in the past because they've just built up over time and they've kind of been able to just been swept over under the rug because you know everybody has their day-to-day life and everyone's going through different things and they don't want to have to worry about those things, especially if it's not happening to them directly. It's just like, well, I don't have to worry about that because it's not happening to me. And this really just came to like the forelight for a lot of other people who don't usually see this type of thing because we're not all working on the day-to-day going home because of the coronavirus. So we really just get to sit and see a lot of stuff we haven't seen before probably play out. But for a lot of people, it's really nothing new because it's something that's been happening right before our eyes, but maybe not like directly. It may be like in the back of our mind. So it's just so it's not, we can't just think about it just as the singular event. It's just because it's all those things that preceded it and all that will happen afterwards unless we all decide to come together and do something about it. And everyone has different opinions on how to achieve that. And I think what we could do best is to have a better understanding is I know for me, because of like my faith and background, like I do want to see more churches kind of come into the forefront so we can figure out what to do. Cause like some people just don't really know what to say. And some churches don't really want to get involved in stuff as well. And I think that's a part of the issue because some churches don't want to say anything. And and I understand like some people need time to figure out what to do. But when people, I'm talking about like when they just specifically choose to not engage whatsoever, it's harming to the process as well.
Well said, Shoreline. Somebody else, how are you feeling today?
Well, personally, things like are okay, but like when I really think about the states and the whole nation, like it's a lot to really think about because like it's it kind of hits different to be in the forefront of two major parts of American history, but like especially for it to like especially for one of those things to have been so relevant for so long, like pretty much like up to 500 plus years of history is all like really saturated right now, and it really beats down on us at times. I know Charlon's probably spoken, it's like a lot for her, but like I can even say, like, just I get to see it every day and I get to live it, and that's a lot to really bear at times. But I know from the relieving thing is at the end of the day though, like I'm seeing I know a lot of people are like for what's going on, because like I see less people ducking or being afraid. I see people speaking out about injustices and whatnot, and like donating and all that, and that's honestly very amazing to see, because you wouldn't we wouldn't have the power to really spread it out as easily as we would have like 4 decades ago, but especially now we do, and with the hearts of the people who are willing to get up and get at it, it's a real blessing. But as Charlon touched on earlier, that's definitely not enough, and it would be nice to see more churches speak out on all of it. But of course, like, not some people don't know what to even say to it all. So in a
Yeah.
nutshell, it's just a lot.
Right. Thanks, Shaq.
No problem.
Somebody else, jump in. Let's hear what you're thinking.
I have to say, man, I'm to the point where I'm getting very frustrated with the media, because there's so many peaceful protests that have been happening over the last couple of weeks to protest injustice, and yet all the media seems to want to show is the riots and all the bad stuff that's going on. So I'm to the point where I haven't been able to watch any kind of news now for the last 2 weeks. I just can't. It's incredibly frustrating that they only want to show what's newsworthy, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing that's newsworthy is the stores being looted and the buildings being burned down, which obviously there needs to be light shed on that, because people need to realize that destroying people's businesses, destroying people's homes, destroying people's lives is not the proper response. So I think it needs to be highlighted, but I think that's being focused on too much. The same way that people tend to focus on the wrongdoings of police officers more than the good things that they do in the community. It's the same kind of thing, right? It seems like every day everyone is just focused on the negative all the time, and not the positive change and the positive people who are both doing their jobs correctly and bringing actual awareness through unified voices. I think it's very frustrating to see.
I hear you, man. Let me ask you another question. Listen, and by the way, just so y'all know, I just want to ask y'all some questions today, because I'm just like each of y'all. I'm trying to come to terms with this, and I'm trying to define for me, what would God have me to do in the midst of all this. So it helps me to hear where you guys are at and to hear your hearts. And I think it helps each other. I think it helps all of us to hear where each other is at and what we're thinking, to get this conversation on the table and to share all the thoughts. Because as far as I know, everybody in this Zoom chat are believers, and so I think we can learn from each other. So for me, I'm like, yesterday I was preparing a whole different Bible study, honestly. And as I sit there, I'm like, no, or I should say Friday. As I studied it, I just could not get all this off my heart. I'm like, you know what? We just need to have a conversation. And what I want this to lead to is next week, I don't want to dive too deep this week, but next week, I want to take what we've discussed today, and I want to open up God's Word, and I want to align our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions with God's Word, and hopefully out of that we can find clearer direction. Because Charlene said it, and I think really all you guys have alluded to it to some way or another, is like, there's silence, silence of the churches. Unfortunately, the media is not silent, but they're speaking too loudly about one aspect of this reality. And so I just want us to find that ground that says, you know what, if we move forward in this way, this is God honoring, and this is right. And let me share with you a verse real quick. Not, we got to at least get in the Word, right? Hey, listen, when you have time today, read Psalm 94. Man, Psalm 94 feels like the day that we live in. But there's one section in it, Psalms 94. I want to start reading verse 12. It says, "Blessed is the man who you instruct, O Lord, and teach out of your law, that you may give him rest from the days of adversity, until the pit is dug for the wicked. For the Lord will not cast off his people, nor will he forsake his inheritance, but judgment will return to the righteous, and all the upright in heart will follow it." And listen to this verse. "Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity?" And that's a great question. And so what does it mean to rise up? What does it mean to stand up? And how do we identify, those evildoers from the ones that are just caught in the middle of this? I think about Michael mentioning earlier about his dad on the Sandy Plains Police Force. Now, I know his dad. I have great respect for his dad. I believe he's an honest and just man. And I believe many of our police officers are. Unfortunately, there's some corrupt ones, just like there's corrupt people in every part of society. And so I just want us to have this conversation. And between now and next week, I want you to be, combing the Word and finding what God's answers are in the words. But here's another question. Let's talk about where does freedom of speech fit into this conversation? I know that sounds kind of out of left field, but how does freedom of speech fit into all this?
Well, Barry, I wanted to tell you, based on the first thing that you had asked us, I wanted to say that thank you for opening this conversation up for everybody. I think that's very important for everybody to be doing at this moment. I don't think it's been done enough in the past, and I think because of how far we've progressed, I guess, as a nation, and technology as well, it has allowed for people to actually see the need for having these type of conversations. So first of all, I just want to thank you for that. And I also wanted to say that freedom of speech, as far as your second question, where does it fit in? I mean, I feel like the purpose of freedom of speech is, in my opinion, is for truth to come out. Like, you can't have truth if only one side is hogging up the narrative. Mm-hmm. You have to see both sides. You have to see 3 sides, 4 sides, 5 sides, all sides, until you finally can come down to what is in fact truth. And I have watched all your other videos in the past Zooms that you did on this series of truth.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add one thing to all that. And I agreed with a lot of what I heard. I wanted to add that that truth, Jesus said, to Pilate, when Pilate asked him, "What is the truth?" Jesus told him, everyone on the side of truth knows me," or something like that along those lines. Mm-hmm. And so I always took that as, if you seek truth, if you actually look for truth for the sake of truth, for actual truth, you will always find Jesus at the end.
Mm. That's a good word, Stephen. Somebody else, let me frame up that question about freedom of speech. And this is one of the struggles I'm really having to fight with. I believe in freedom of speech. I believe everybody has the right to say what they want to say. That's one of the things that makes our country different from many other countries. So here's where I'm challenged. In our neighborhood, reality is, people are going to downtown Kennesaw and they're doing peaceful protest, and that's great. I'm glad people are exercising their right. And so now that a part of that has already accomplished removing, the rebel flag from the flagpole and replaced with a different historic flag, and that's a good thing. But also they're protesting because they want the guy Wild Man to hear their voice. And he is, if you go and look at his property, his wall, I mean, he is a staunch racist. I mean, I absolutely agree with nothing about this man. And so, I wonder, does he have a right to do that? If we believe in freedom of speech, does, at what point do we have to draw the line and say, you're not free to say that?
I hate to see it too. And like you see it for a lot of things, because like I've heard this one saying say like where one's freedom starts, another's ends. And I feel like it's one of those circumstances and of like one of the worst cases of it.
Yes.
And on paper he's defended from it, but like when enough people disagree against something, like it can counter stuff like that. So I feel like in a short sense, it really ought to be like you're free to do like and say things, but like when something's like genuinely out of its way to hurt someone, that's when it's seriously a problem.
Yes. Somebody else, what are your thoughts on that? These extremes, at what point can we say they're not allowed?
Well, I also think another thing is, well, I mean, he's allowed to have his views and express them, but I think also holding a business, just, like how people view businesses in society, and they're like, well, sometimes people see businesses and they're like, oh, these are the values the town upholds because they're in the forefront, because this is valuable to them. And I think some people see that and they're like, okay, well, of course he's allowed to have his business. But also it's like, is this really the type of business we want in a society that claims that everybody is a part? But when some people, well, I know especially me, when I see things like that, I always feel like I'm never truly welcome, and that hurts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people feel that way. Yeah. Somebody else have a comment on that?
I feel like as far as freedom of speech goes in that regard, everyone should have the ability to express themselves, even if it's uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, if society holds to a certain standard, then that person's going to be held accountable for what they say. If they're not being held accountable, then it means that society is okay with what they say. And so it's legal for them to say what they want to say, but socially it should be condemned.
Yeah, so that goes back to really the title of what we're talking about, social injustice versus civil disobedience. Because to me, when I look at what he's doing, and I know there's a whole group that has this mindset, this white supremacy mindset, and in my heart and mind, that's social injustice. And so therefore, they're, just as he has the right to do all that, somebody else has the right to express civil disobedience against it. And so then the question becomes, how far can that civil disobedience go? Because that's another part of this, is that especially in the 60s, and of course we see it today, it's a much different vibe, trust me. But in the 60s, you had Dr. Martin Luther King that taught that the civil disobedience had to be without violence, and that was the way that Christ would have it, and that was the only thing that was going to change history. But yet you had Malcolm X and the Black Muslims who said, no, the only way that we're going to get change is we're going to have to be civilly disobedient with violence. And so they both believed in what they was doing. I don't see that dynamic today. I just see the dynamic of some people going peaceful disobedience and other people going, you know what, I've had it. I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm getting violent. And you know, this is the result. And so how you know, at what point do you have to stop? I said earlier, this is a fine line. How far can we go with it to get the attention of people that something needs to change? What do y'all feel about that?
Well, as I said before, I feel like, well, I know for like me and probably a lot of us, since our background is in Jesus faith, that we would want would want someone to have a leader, which is what Martin Luther King was to a lot of people. Like, he set that example and he modeled that. And I feel like now, like, yes, people can model from what he did in the past, but it's different, like, reading about things that somebody did than having like an actual physical person representative of what to do. And I think that's why, like, a lot of these get really choppy, because different people have different motivations about what they think would be the best way to go about this. And I think, like I said, like, I believe that that churches that can and are willing should step up and like set the example of what people should do. Because, yeah, like you said, there is a fine line of like what's appropriate and what's not. And I think, like, you need somebody there to set that standard of like, okay, well, we're not going to cross this line, but this is okay. Like, it's like because like there's a fine line between letting someone take your seat on the bus like Rosa Parks, and then just like burning down a city. And so, I mean, they're both different symptoms to an overlying problem. Like, you understand like the outrage and stuff, but also like but which one's going to get your point across better and getting more people joining your journey? Because some people will see your point one way, and other people are definitely not going to see your point another way. But also at the same time, some people will completely ignore your point either way. So we just have to, I think we need guidance.
Yes.
Yeah, so for me, I am 100% against any kind of the looting or the burning or the destruction of property. I'm 100% against that.
Yeah, I think most people are.
Yeah, that's the thing about that is, like, you know, not only that's the easiest way to turn people off to your movement, because, you know, people see that and they're like, well, I don't want to be a part of this. This is just destruction. But also, you know, they people who are destroying everything claim to be doing it in the name of change, but what they don't realize is half the businesses they're destroying in these inner cities are Black-owned businesses. It's like the way we need to work on, you know, building up people of color in the society is by building them up, and destroying their businesses is not a good way to do that. I think it's very counterintuitive. So yeah, that's just, like, you know, and I realize that's an opinion that I'm sure I hope is shared by most people. But when it comes to the actual civil disobedience, you know, like protesting, that is something that as Americans, that's a privilege that we have that a lot of countries genuinely do not have, the freedom of speech to do that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that we need to make sure it's never, that right is never trampled on. So.
Okay, so then let me move on to this. Sherlon, you mentioned about you said something along the lines about how this movement is just kind of fractured and breaking into little pieces for lack of leadership, and I totally I feel that as well. I'll give you a perfect example. Last weekend there was a a peaceful protest in Kennesaw, over 3,000 people showed up. So they thought, well, let's do it again this weekend. And I didn't go through town this weekend, but my daughter and her husband and their kids come through town to come to our house yesterday evening. And they said, it was just a handful.
Yeah, what's kind of funny, when I was in college, I took an English class, and they themed the English classes and stuff. And so my class in particular was e-identity, and we did like a unit where we talked about like online activism and how for some people it's really just slacktivism, because you can like make your voice known for like that little span of time, and then like you can satisfy yourself like in that moment and feel like you did something, and then you can just move on to your day-to-day life.
Wow.
Which for like some people, like it's great for them that they can move on to their day-to-day life, but for me, this is my life. This has always been my life, and I can't just turn it off. And it's very unsatisfying to see things like that, because you're hopeful for change, and then you see all of it on the internet, and then when it comes to the bare bones of it, when you actually have to go out there and show it, it's a completely different story, because it's so easy to retweet and share a post. And I understand like everyone has different avenues of things that they can do, because some people don't understand that. They think they have to go out and do there's completely different things that you can do to support if you can't go out. But you can't just sit there and like share one thing one time and think, yep, this is it.
Great point. Anybody else? What are you thinking?
I definitely agree with the slacktivism thing. I see it firsthand. Well, some people I'll commend some people, because some people really been on it. I'll see them on social media posting something about the movement like every day. But like others, like you'll do like a cute chain, or like turn your profile screen black or whatever for like you said, a weekend or a week, and then it just wraps and back to like unjust society. So
Yeah. So I want to ask one last question. We've got about another 8 minutes, and our time will be out. And so I want you to answer this question, because I know people, I'm going to try to encourage people to watch this and hear what you guys are feeling. I think it's totally appropriate, and it's a good direction to at least get people thinking in. So I would ask you this, just if several of y'all could answer, what would you want to see?
Well, as I've said like multiple times in this, like
Yes.
it's definitely in my heart. I would like to see more churches step up and like be the example if they can. Like I understand that it's very complicated and it's uncomfortable, but I also feel like we've seen even in the word uncomfortable situations and people overcoming, and I feel like this is really where we can put our faith out as we say that it is. And because I've been doing my best when I've been like going through this and searching, I've always tried to make sure I back my stances with my faith. And I think people need to see that. They need to see that, because some people because I've definitely seen people because there are definitely churches who have gone the other way and haven't said anything, and people are like, well, I mean, they're not saying anything, so I don't have to do anything because this is how it's supposed to be. And yeah, I don't know how to get there.
You explained your heart beautifully. Somebody else, what do you want to see?
We need to see reform as a whole. It's like this is like an issue that really shouldn't even be as deep of an issue as it is. Like it's just don't have an unjust system that keeps some people down and keeps others up. Because like I see some like the worst things of it based on demographics, on like how other people are treated differently, and like there's like tons of microaggressions that go into it, and people are just okay with it just because, oh, it's just a thing of society, and like it shouldn't be a thing for like such things to even be happening to like people just because of something as trivial how they were born. Because there's just so many against people from the start, and it stops people from going forward, and it keeps us in this loop now. So I want this to really go forward. I don't want this to just be a repeat of 40 years ago and nothing to happen, especially with like so many people being on fire for it. I don't want this to get swept under the rug by like this corrupt society at hand and like quack media.
Yeah. Thanks, Shaq. Somebody else, tell me, what do you want to see? We got 4 minutes.
I think I would like to see people really show more interest in what other people are experiencing, what other people's life experiences are, that are not like them. When I was in high school, this was like in 2001, I had just came maybe about a year or two ago from Miami. And in Miami, there's a lot of Latinos where I grew up in Hialeah. So I didn't really know a lot of Black people. I knew some Black people, not too many. I didn't know a lot of white people either. And I didn't know a lot about Southern culture. Only what I learned in school, with Martin Luther King and civil rights movement, stuff like that. When I moved to the South, I had moved in 2001 to Clayton County by Stockbridge. Mount Zion High School was like, you had white people who wore Robert E. Lee shirts, Confederate shirts and Confederate flags. Then you had Black people who, might wear a Malcolm X shirt or something like that. It was like so the disparity was so night and day. It seemed like. So I remember having a class, a lit class, and on one of those occasions where like the teacher wasn't there and everybody was just kind of doing their work or just like hanging around. I saw a guy wearing a Malcolm X shirt. I asked him about it. And, he started saying, well, I mean, if other guys can be wearing, their Confederate shirts, then I'm going to wear my Malcolm X shirt.
Yeah.
At the time, I had the impression that Malcolm X was like this, not really great guy and all this, because that's what we kind of learned. I decided we started talking about that. And then I asked the other guy that was wearing Robert E. Lee shirt, how come, why are you wearing that? And he said it was my heritage. And well, I'm not going to go into all the details of what the conversation was, but at the end of the conversation, I try to keep everybody cool, level-headed. And what I discovered was that the guy that was wearing the Robert Lee shirt was okay with, him being able to express himself and being able to, show his heritage, and that it will be on equal standing as, this other Black guy who was wearing a Malcolm X shirt. And the Black guy did not feel as satisfied with the conversation where the conversation ended. He felt like it wasn't his point of view wasn't expressed correctly, in the sense that those people, the people that are holding up this heritage, pretty much subjected them to and oppressed them to slavery, and wanted to keep it that way.
Yeah. Hey, let me say this before we go on. We got less than a minute. If it shuts off, then we're out. But thank you, Stephen. All of this is going to be shared, and I'm going to ask people to watch it. Next week, we're going to open up the Word, and I want you guys to be inspired in what to do. I want you to let God's Word. We've been talking for weeks about God's truth, living it according to God's truth. Well, God has truth on this, and I want you guys to know it, and I want you to live by it. And so next week, don't just have the conversation this week. Come back next week, and let's let God interject His direction into this conversation. And maybe we will all be inspired as to what we should do to make a difference, a lasting difference, because social injustice needs to stop.